Thank you so much for joining us for this new edition of Writer's Block. I'm Jo. I'm a board member of the Korean American Story, whose mission is to capture, create, preserve, and share the stories of Korean American experience. Writer's Block is our virtual community event where you can personally engage with the Korean American authors and writers. This program is made possible by our monthly Storyteller Circle donors, and you can join the Storyteller Circle yourself by texting storytellers to 44321 or by visiting our website, koreanamericanstory.org. And now that's done. I am thrilled to welcome our guest for this third edition of Writer's Block 2022, Soo Hugh. Soo Hugh is the showrunner, executive producer, writer, and visionary behind the Apple TV drama Pachinko. Following the success of Pachinko, which has been just greenlighted for the second season, Soo is continuing her partnership with Apple TV as a co-showrunner of The White Darkness, based on David Grann's nonfiction book and starring Tom Hiddleston. Also, Soo recently signed a multi-year overall deal with UCP to develop, write, and produce projects, in addition to launching an incubator program, the 1,000 Miles Project, to help bring more AAPI stories to cinematic life and jumpstart fruitful careers in the entertainment industry. Soo was previously the co-showrunner for the critically lauded first season of AMC's The Terror. Her other television credits include creating The Whispers for ABC and writing for the AMC's The Killing and CBS's Under the Dome. So Soo, it's so great to see you. Welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Good to see you. So we are Korean American Story. So we usually start with your Korean American story. So can you tell us where you were born and where did you grow up?
So I was born in Busan, and then I came here, my parents and I came here when I was about a little over 1 year old. And for the first few years of my life, we moved around a lot. So my childhood is very fuzzy, and I feel like I've heard that from a lot of immigrants, where we first moved to Maryland and then to Denver and then back to Maryland. So then I think middle school was the first time where we really settled in one place. And I was in Maryland for middle school till I graduated high school.
So when you were growing up, were you interested in television? Were you watching a lot of television? Were you watching a lot of movies? What were you interested?
Who doesn't? Yeah, I watched a lot of TV. I was a latchkey kid. So like from a very, very young age, my brother and I, we would let ourselves in after school. My parents both worked. And the first thing you do when you get home is you turn the TV on. So for me, the TV just became this background. But I don't think I really understood what TV and film was until I distinctly remember, when I was in 7th grade. When we went to video stores back then, and I remember the new releases were $2.99 for 2 nights, but everything else was $1 a video, right? So then I remember I was able to get 5 of the $1 videos. And I remember I took out The Godfather. And I remember this at 12 years old. And obviously my parents had no clue, because I'm not sure a 12-year-old should be watching The Godfather. And that's another good thing about having an immigrant parent, because they have no idea what The Godfather is. At first I was like, this is the most boring movie in the world. Why did I, I remember the cover and it looked so dramatic. And then it was like, this is really boring. But then something clicked where I felt like, oh, the reason why this feels different, this is not TV or film that I'm used to. This is not, I don't know, Pretty in Pink or those kind of things. And then all of a sudden I realized there was this really amazing world out there. And I really, pretty much then I knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker.
But you went to college and then you went to film school for grad school. So what was that process like? And how did you convince your parents that you're going to go to film school as a grad student?
Because I talked about film from such an early age, it was something that they were pretty used to, but I think they were sort of like, well, why don't you be a journalist? That makes money. We sense that you like writing a lot. And when I was in college, I did experimental films mostly. And that was something my mom did not get at all. And then I went to New York and I worked for a year, and that was sort of the bargain we made, is I was going to get a real job. I got a job at a digital marketing firm and worked for a year. And if I still felt like I wanted to go do film, then she would say, okay, but I had to like give a real job a chance. And, you know, once I did that job, it's like I was very much still wanted to be a filmmaker. And that's when I moved to LA.
And then after you graduated from film school and when you started working in sort of in the entertainment industry, what was your expectation for your own career and how was it very different from what you were envisioning when you first started?
What was interesting, I think, when you're first starting out is just your definition of making it changes along the way of your career, if that makes sense, right? So when you're first starting out, like making it was like something as like just getting a job was making it in any way, as an assistant in any form, that was making it. And I think I didn't realize going into film just how hierarchical it was, or just how bureaucratic it was. I thought you write a film and then you make it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I started the incubator program, was because, especially coming from a small town in Maryland and not being exposed to any of it, I had no clue how the industry worked. Film school was the first time that I got exposed to it, but I think film school is a racket because you're also paying someone a tremendous amount of money, you know, which I just don't think is worth it. And especially once I graduated from film school, I had to get a job and no one would hire me because I was not qualified to do anything. And so someone finally took a chance on me and I got an assistant job. And that's the funny thing about this, is that I hustled to get a $28,000 a year job that I couldn't even pay my student loans, but at least that was my first foot in the door. And I would say my first job in the industry as an assistant was probably my real film school. So I always give the advice to people: skip film school, go be an assistant for a year, because that was the first time I realized, oh, this is how you make films. This is the business. This is the lingo. And what is so, so helpful about being an assistant is, in Hollywood, there's something called rolling calls. And it's going to sound very strange. When I first heard about it, I was like, why would anyone do that? But basically, the assistants are on every single phone call that your bosses are on, every single call. And what that does, more important than just knowing what's going on, it makes you not afraid of people. So, you know, when you hear your bosses talk to each other and they're talking about a project, and then they're getting on a call with a famous producer or even a famous actor, and you realize just how human they are, all of a sudden it just demystifies everything. And I think taking that fear away is such a huge, huge thing. Is once you lose that fear, then I do think anything is possible.
Was there any moment when you just went kind of, you know, sort of that moment in Oz when you open up the curtain and there's a tiny little man behind the curtain? It sounded more like it was empowering for you, that demystification. But like, was there moments when you just went like, is this it? Like, it like kind of disappointed by it?
No, but I think there's something really, I think it makes me, it's sort of humbling in some ways when you hear, you know, very powerful people talk about hemorrhoids, right? And you're just like, they have hemorrhoids just like us. And just how human people are. Because I think sometimes the press and the media around the industry makes people feel like God figures, right? You know, I was a very young assistant, and just even knowing that, it didn't demystify anything, but it just made everything just feel more humanized.
Very interesting. So then I wanted to ask you about you wear many different hats. You're the showrunner, executive producer, but since this is the writer's block, I wanted to sort of focus on your job as a writer, somebody is specifically writing for television. So what does that actually mean to you, writing for television? And how did you, after working as an assistant, like how do you even begin to start applying for jobs and figuring out what is needed if you're interested in writing for television?
So I'll do the how did I get in first, and then I'll flip to what writing is. I think I have a very specific answer to that. I think people will be surprised. Once I was an assistant and I was working 60, 70 hours on that desk. And what was depressing was I didn't have time to write. And at one point I was thinking, you know what, maybe I'm not a writer. I'll just be an assistant and work my way up in the development circuit and be a creative executive and go that route. And that's just the risk averse nature, I think, of the industries, because it seems so impossible to make it. But then at one point, I remember I was 6 months into my job and I realized it's now or never, right? I was very young. I didn't have kids. The job at least paid my rent, and I was starting to pay off my student loans every month. So like, this is it. So every day, you know, I made myself a goal that I had to write 3 pages. Anything more was just going to feel too daunting for me. I was going to get overwhelmed. 3 pages felt really doable. And so then after 6 months, I had a screenplay. Now I'm doing this show about this man right now who trekked across Antarctica. And it's interesting, people who do extreme sports like that or distance sports, they do the same thing. You can't think about trekking 1,000 miles because then you can't move. You'll feel like you're frozen. But if you can say to yourself, 1 mile at a time, right? I'm just going to go 1 mile. Okay, another mile. And I think for writing, it's the same thing. 3 pages today, 3 pages tomorrow, you know, and just stay on that really bite-sized morsels. And so I was able to finish a screenplay in 6 months. And it really was the Cinderella story. And I want to be very, very realistic about things. So I think it's really important to tell people how things really are, the good and the bad. And I don't think of myself as an idealistic, naive person, but I do think that when I think about my trajectory and my break into the industry, the meritocracy worked. It was surprising, but it worked. You know, you would think that because I worked for a pretty powerful person in Hollywood that I would have a direct way in. I knew that my boss was not the kind of person that I could give my script to. You know, he's a wonderful person, but he just wasn't that kind of person. And so I applied to all these script programs that you hear about and you think, oh, I'll never get it. I'll never get it. First of all, those felt like shams because you had to pay $30 to apply. There's this one program and it still exists nowadays. And it was the ABC Disney. And at that time it was a feature program. And I believe it still exists, the feature program. But they hired, if you get selected, you're one of 4 writers and they pay you, I think, $100,000 a year, which was like double what I made as an assistant to write a script. Now, I made it to the final 10. And for the final 10, they bring you in and they interview you. And I didn't get in, right? So that I remember feeling like, oh, that was my one shot. It's over. But then after I didn't get in, one of the execs from that meeting called me and said, you didn't get in, but do you want me to pass your script to a manager? And I was like, of course, yes, please. And it really was this thing where he sent that script to a manager on Wednesday. The manager read it on Wednesday night. On Thursday, I had a meeting with that manager. The manager then sent the script out on Friday. And then on Friday night, it was one of these moments. And I still remember I was driving home in my Toyota Corolla in LA when I got a phone call. And it was that phone call from my manager who I'd known for 48 hours. And he said, so I think the script's getting good reads. And I was like, oh, great. What does that mean? He's like, Spielberg's reading it this weekend. And I was like, what? Like, what? Spielberg ended up not doing that feature, but that really did launch me. And I was able to quit my job and I worked in features for a while.
That's an amazing story. I mean, that's such a Hollywood story, right? And
that's
what you always hear, like somebody like Spielberg will find you. But then let's talk a little bit about the nitty gritty. So you thought you were going to be working as a feature film director or writer, or whatever that meant. How did it happen that you got into television?
So the feature film business, when I got in, of course, was collapsing, right? So at that time, studios were making fewer and fewer films. They were making less interesting films. And somehow I got pigeonholed in the feature film industry as the girl who wrote, I think I was called the chick. I remember someone saying this. I was the chick who wrote action films. Now, I don't know how I got pigeonholed in that because I don't watch action films, but I wrote action very well. And also because so few women were in that genre, it was a thing my managers and agents really put me up for all the time. So I did, I got paid to write scripts that never got made. I got paid to do rewrites and punch-ups. And it was sort of like this moment where it's like, I'm making a living but I don't love what I'm writing. And I felt a little bit soulless at that time. But my agents had been telling me, you should get into TV, And this was when Mad Men and Breaking Bad and all those shows were starting to launch. And I was really interested in TV, but I didn't think I wanted to do TV. The idea of being in a writer's room and losing my freedom as a feature writer, I was just really nervous about that. And then they sent me the pilot script for The Killing. And I thought it was just terrific. and it felt different. And then you meet with, when you would get sent pilots, when you get sent scripts by your agents, then if the showrunner wants to meet you, they meet with lots of writers for like certain number of spots in a writer's room. And that meeting went well, and I got staff on The Killing. And what was amazing was I walked in and there was 8 of writers, and everyone was just so lovely. And that was like that room was sort of a starry room in the end, because all of us just did very, very well together. I mean, Nick Pizzolatto was in that room. It was just a superstar room, and I learned so much from everyone. And after that, I got the bug, because in features, you write features, you get hired, people rewrite you, and nothing ever gets made. In TV, I walked into The Killing room in September, and I think in February, I was on set, and you're watching your words get made. So it was so much more just gratifying. And also, I think television is a better writer's medium as well.
Why is that? Why do you think? Because everybody says, film is a director's medium, in a sense, because it's more about the director's visions. And I mean, I do think that we live in a sort of the Renaissance era for television, for sure. Yeah. And there are so many interesting, well-made television series out there. Why do you think television is better for sort of the writers to spread their wings a little bit more?
Well, I think because it's the long arc, and directors don't stay on projects that long, you really need stewards of the story, and to make sure the story is being protected and that the characters are being protected. And so when I think about, I was a staff writer on The Killing, sent to set for my very first episode being shot, and the writer tells the director what to do. And I was just astonished, and I felt like, I'm going to give you a note, and it feels very strange to me. But that is the power dynamic in television, right? And so now, as a creator and showrunner, it's that relationship. I hire the directors, I hire all the HODs, I do all the edits and posts. So the show is much more. And I'm not saying this because I feel like I just want to own everything, but I know the show better than everyone, because I lived with it from the very beginning, inception. And I lived with it in shaping the show with the writer's room. And then there's no one else that's been there creatively from beginning to end. So the writer has to be the protector.
So I want to go back to the writer's room a little bit, because I think a lot of people don't realize that in television, even though like there might be just one person who's credited for that particular episode, usually there is a writer's room, which means it's a group of writers who are working together and they write the series together. That's sort of my understanding of it. So you've been part of the writer's room. You've been leading writer's room for your series as well. What makes somebody a good television writer? What do you look for when you're looking to hire somebody as somebody who's going to write for your series? Obviously a good writer, but what does that mean to you to be a good television writer?
That's such a great question, an impossible question. I think everyone looks for different things. When I did my first show, The Whispers, which is not a very good show, but it was I credit ABC with giving me money to fail, because I needed to fail to know what I did wrong, if that makes sense. And I'm sure ABC does not see it that way and does not want to see it that way, but it is what happened. I mean, because it was my first show, and I was very, I felt like, I have to do it right. And I didn't know what right meant, but I did it the traditional way. I hired all television writers. We met for 24 weeks. While we're breaking, the writer goes off and writes his or her script, comes back, then we break the next episode, and the shooting starts. And it was terrible. And I did not flourish in that process whatsoever, in that traditional model. It just didn't bring out the best in me. And I don't think I brought out the best in the writers as well. So it was a failure in all respect, even though they were terrific people. But the lesson I learned from that was I need to do it differently. And then from subsequent rooms, what I realized is I'm actually not interested in writers per se, because at some bar, you should always, once you get to a certain bar that you're getting staff, you should be a good writer, or you shouldn't even be in the conversation, right? So I accept that if I'm reading you, you're going to be a good writer. But the thing that I'm really looking for is, how does your brain work? And where's your sense of empathy and your sense of just world awareness, if that makes sense. So I really like to put the writer's room together with lots of different types of thinkers. So, for example, Pachinko, we had novelists, we have poets, we had playwrights, we have traditional TV writers, we have feature writers. This past season in Pachinko season 2, I had David Mitchell, who was one of my favorite novelists, and I had Chang Ray Lee. Yeah, and I had Chang Ray Lee, who is, I think, the godfather of, when I think of Asian American novelists, he really set some of the huge foundations. And neither of them came from traditional TV backgrounds, but because their brains were just extraordinary brains, TV's not rocket science, right? I don't cure cancer. And it's just a bunch of people who I think really have a grasp of humanity. And I've been very, very fortunate in that room worked really, really well.
That sounds amazing to be in the same room with David Mitchell and Chang Lee all at the same time. But I do want to talk a little bit about the idea of adaptation, because Pachinko is based on a novel, as everybody knows. Your first project, The Killing, was actually based on a Danish TV series, I believe. Under the Dome was based on Stephen King novel. And your new series, White Darkness, is also based on nonfiction book. And I know this is usually the case in many entertainment industry products. There is a source materials. I mean, you don't see a lot of, sort of the brand new something, that just comes out of the writer's head. There's always seems to be some sort of a source material. So when you got to a point where you could choose what source material to choose from, what drew into that particular material? What makes you think that should be adapted into a TV series or a streaming series?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an elusive thing to really put your finger on. I know I don't like to do the same thing twice, but then I have friends who are writers who really have a wheelhouse that they're just passionate about, and they really want to do those shows, and that makes total sense to me too. For me, I just get bored very easily, and I love research. I love going down the rabbit hole of research. I really like immersing myself into worlds that I don't know. So I like adaptations of things I haven't done before. I also find, and maybe as I get older, this will change, but things that really terrify me are such a huge draw, if that makes sense. I get sent things and I was like, oh, I know I can do that show. Not to say it's an easy show. It's like, I know exactly how I would do it. I know how to make that show. And I don't know if that feels as interesting to me. It's the books and the articles that I get where I was like, oh, I am so out of my depth here. That sort of makes you want to wade in deeper.
Yeah. And why not, right? If it's not a challenge. So we are going to open up the questions to everybody. So if you have questions for Soo, you can send them to us. But before we go there, I do want to ask you about this idea of mentoring the young people. Now that you're this famous executive producer and writer, and you have this sort of the agency to hire certain people, but also to mentor people, just like you're doing right now. And your 1,000 Miles project is built, designed exactly to do that. Not just you, but a lot of the people in the industry, specifically sort of looking out for the young people and trying to guide them, in sort of the right direction and let them flourish. So if there's the one thing you wish you knew when you first started, what would that be?
Be bold. I think people start off being such rule followers, meaning you read the screenwriting books, right? And they tell you 3-act structure, and then you read articles about other people's careers, and you're like, this is how you do it. I would say if I had known that what people like me are looking for is people who don't do that, I think I would have taken risks much sooner in my life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Makes total sense. And what would be something that you would tell somebody not to do?
I always, whenever people ask me for advice or to read scripts, I'm very careful to say this. I am one person, and this is just my opinion. because I remember when I was coming up, I would take some people's word as Bible, because like, oh, this person has worked in the industry, he or she must know. At some point, no one knows anything. And even with people with the best intentions who are there to help you, if something gut wise doesn't feel right to you, it's like, you know, no one knows anything, period. So don't take anyone's word or notes or advice as gospel.
I think that's a good advice. So before we open up to the questions from everybody, we do this fun little thing called quick fire questions. It's a set of very silly questions that you can just answer very quickly without thinking too much. So here we go.
Okay.
So what's your favorite kimchi?
Mukimchi.
Your least favorite Korean food?
Sundae.
That seems to be a popular answer. When were you growing up, whose posters adorned your bedroom?
Michael J. Fox.
Your favorite K-drama?
Okay, this is gonna date me. No one even knows this K-drama. It's called Omogi. It's from the 80s. No one knows of it, but I remember watching it with my mom and I loved it.
Right. What is the most underrated television show, in your opinion?
Oh my goodness. I haven't watched TV in so long because I haven't at any time, but about 2 years ago, I watched this show by Russell T Davies. It's a British show and it's so good and no one has ever talked about it.
Yes. So with Emma Thompson?
Yes, where she's the villain of that show. I think I was so blown away by that show and no one talked about it.
I know you have little children. So if there's a children's show or movie that your children don't like, but you secretly wish they would so you can watch it with them, what would that be?
So they are not into Harry Potter and I don't know why. And it really bothers me. It feels like a failure of imagination on their part. So I just keep trying to indoctrinate them.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Stop time.
And in your next life, you would like to come back as what?
As a fertility doctor.
Really?
Yes, because my God, I had fertility issues, but they are gods. They can decide so much and they charge so much. You're just this job should not exist.
So we're now going to go to audience submitted questions. This is a question from Linda. What is a recent novel you read or are currently reading that you really enjoyed?
I don't read anymore for pleasure. I haven't read for pleasure in so long. I read a lot of polar exploration books for the white darkness about stupid white men who decide to climb impossible mountains. And I read a lot of harrowing tales about World War II.
Yeah. Fun.
Yeah.
Pearl is asking, how is the structure of TV writing different from feature writing?
That's a very complicated question because there's so many different types of TV shows, right? So the difference is it a comedy? Is it a drama? Is it a half hour? Is it an hour long? Is it a limited series? Is it an ongoing series? And all of those are going to dictate different structures. Instead of we're using the word structure, because I always find structures to be really limiting, is I always say, what's the engine? Give me the story engine. What is the motor that's going to drive you to go from one episode to another? Is it a show that is dependent on cliffhangers? Is it a show that's dependent on, figure out what the story engine is first? And we'll first figure out what kind of show is it, in terms of the big buckets, and then figure out what kind of engine you need.
And then Sue asks, how do you go about pitching a TV show idea? Do you have to have an entire screenplay written out? So what do you pitch when you pitch your idea to the production companies?
So it totally depends on what kind of TV show it is. So right now, for example, you work with, there's different strategies. Certain shows, they'll say, you know what, we're going to pitch it because the marketplace will like it as a pitch. They'll see it right away and we can sell it on a pitch. There's certain shows that will say, you know what, the script needs to be written first because it's such an execution dependent idea. And then write the script, then we'll take that to market. And within both models, there's different packaging options nowadays, right? Which is even with a pitch or even with a screenplay, do we need any talent or director attached? So I didn't answer the question directly. because it really depends on what kind of show it is.
And then Abby asks, can you talk about the cultural, if there was a cultural shift or willingness from Hollywood, in Hollywood, to produce Korean stories, or I guess more Asian oriented, AAPI specific stories. Do you feel there is a shift, or is this just kind of a fad right now, or do you think there is really a cultural shift?
I think anyone who says there isn't a shift, I don't know what world he or she has been living in. The fact that a show like Pachinko got made is impossible. The fact that Squid Game is the #1 watched TV show in the world is impossible. The fact that I can have a writer's room that is all Asian is impossible. But now it's the norm, right? So what became an impossibility is now considered not even a conversation. That didn't exist when I started out. Like, that conversation just would never even have existed. For so long, I was either the only woman or the only person of color, let alone Asian, by the way. Like, it was a gift to have another person of color in the room, right? And now, if the room isn't reflect the world that we live in, the studios and the networks are pretty good about saying, like, I've had friends say, like, I need more people of color because I need to staff half my, they're having trouble finding talent, writers who are, my God, they are demanding people of color. This is an opportunity we've never had before, right? This is an opportunity that is, who knows if it's going to flame out, but it is here. And I think if all writers don't take advantage of it now, they're stupid.
Then how do you take advantage of it? I mean, like, I think that's and I guess, program like Thousand Miles Project can help, but you hear all these stories and about it, but then how does one, if you're just starting out, then what do you do? Like, do you write about your personal stories? Do you write about somebody else? Or like, do you just prove that? I mean, the track you took was you wrote about whatever was given to you. You were assigned a job and then you proved that you could do it. And then you started to choose your own project. So how do you sort of make yourself, I guess the question is, do you want to be considered as the minority writer in the room and then sort of get in there? Or do you want to just prove that you are a good writer? I guess both.
I think, so the first question is, like, how do you, is right. I know that sounds like the simplest answer, but I have so many conversations with people who want to be writers. And I ask, like, what do you do? How many scripts do you have? And they're like, oh, I have half a script. It's like, you're not a writer. And I'm very harsh about this, right? Or if they say, I have one script, it's like, what have you been doing? If they graduated from film school 5 years ago and you have one script, like, this is where I'm like, look, come on, this is the tough love. If you're a writer, you have to write. And if you want to only have one script, it better be the best script, right? And I feel like so many people are so focused on getting an agent or hustling or getting in the industry that really don't worry about it. Just write. Because if you write something extraordinary, they really will find you. And as to that question about being a minority writer, that's why I'm being naive right now and idealistic, but I think that conversation is really sort of muted because it does seem woven into the fabric. Is when I look at writers list now, because you get writers list, it's not even divided between persons of color and non-persons of color. It used to be. Lists used to be divided between women and men, people of color and people of not color. I'm getting writers lists now, right? And I can't tell you that there's pros and cons to that, right? Because should lists be separated to give minorities more of an exposure? Or is it better that we only have one list and it is integrated and that there's no right answer to that? But for me, I look at a list now and I see names, and they're names that have so much diversity in them. And that feels really just refreshing.
That's great to hear. I think Deb Kim wanted to ask the question herself. So Deb, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Sue. Thank you so
Hi.
much for being here. So I actually had two questions. I am in entertainment as like an actor, dancer, and writer, but so my first question was, if you're used to writing in a certain medium, like poetry or songwriting, would you recommend ways to go about learning to write for TV? And my second question was, even though there's just a lot better representation across the board today, do you still feel like there's still like a lot of hierarchy and power dynamics and a ceiling to get into those rooms?
Yeah. Well, so Deb, let me ask you a question to answer your first question. What do you want to be? What do you want to do?
Personally, I am kind of stepping away from dance, and I love acting and writing, and I would love to be on camera, but in the long run, I would love to write, whether that's for TV or for musicians. I think my end goal is to be behind the camera, but be able to perform.
Deb, you just gave me 4 jobs.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean? Deb, you have to choose one for now, right? Do you want to be a TV writer? Do you want to be a songwriter? Do you want to be an actress? Just like for now, just for the next 2 months, just for 2 months, choose one and stick with it and focus. Because to focus on 4 different, each of those 4 things are huge careers, right? And you're competing against, this is how we need to think about it. You're competing against people who only want to be TV writers. You're competing against people who only want to be songwriters. So why are you competing against 4 buckets of people? You just made it so much harder for yourself. So for the next 2 months, just choose one discipline and focus on it. And if it doesn't work and you don't feel satisfied, you can always switch, And as opposed to the glass ceiling, there's definitely a glass ceiling, and that's because the people in power are still the patriarchy and white.
Do you see that ever changing?
Slowly. I mean, the new assistants coming up, because when I look at, like the assistants on the emails, like you see more diverse names. Those people will be the people in power. It just takes time to rise. And we're just going through that awkward growing phase. But I do think it will change.
I think Paul had a question that he wanted to ask.
Thank you, Jay. Hi, Soo. Thank you for being here with us. Hi, everybody. My question was, first of all, congratulations on Pachinko. It's amazing. I read the book,
thank you.
And then I started watching it, and I stopped watching it. So I got to reread the book and then finish watching the series just to kind of get the whole context. But my question for you is, could you talk a little bit more about your process, your writing process? And what would you say are certain just great principles for writers wanting to have a successful career?
So I hate writing. It's terrible. It really is terrible. And the minute you get paid for it, it's a different type of writing, right? And we know that it's a job. So I think that's where your brain sort of fritzes a little bit. I'm very slow, and no matter how I try to be faster, I'm just not fast. And I think it's because I do like to take care with word choices, and I take a lot of time with characters. And it's interesting. I'll answer your question by talking about how I edit, because it does affect the way I write. When I edit episodes, I always edit the beginning and I always edit the end. Because if I know the beginning and the end, then I feel pretty confident about the shape of it, and then I fill in the middle. With writing, I do the sort of same thing. I always start with my teaser, or what I call my prologues, and then I always jump to the ending of the last 10 minutes of how I'm going to end the episode. And then I feel like I have a much more of a foundation to do the rest, to beat out the rest of the episodes.
Yeah, is it true that you had the last scene of the season 1 of Pachinko in your mind from the very beginning, that it's going to be that moment when Sinja goes to the market and starts selling kimchi? That was always going to be the last scene of the first season?
Yeah, and it's always worked out that way for all my shows. I just know the ending, and without it, I just don't know what I'm working towards. So it really helped me to know that.
Does it help that you are adapting a story to sort of choose that ending?
Oh, of course. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, there are people who do non-adaptations who can create worlds completely from nothing, right? And I find that I'm so in awe of that. I like adaptations. I like that spine being there.
Monica had wanted to ask you sort of a personal question. Were there any early inspirations or experiences during your college years that encouraged you to choose a career path in film versus other careers?
Really, because it started so young, that filmmaking passion, I just didn't know what kind of filmmaker. It took me a long time to figure out what kind of filmmaker I wanted to be, and that's where, like, at first I thought I wanted to be an experimental filmmaker. And then I thought I wanted to be more of an independent filmmaker. And, it took me a while to find sort of just my voice, if that makes sense. But I don't think there was any, I wish I had this really amazing inspiration story of like that moment where in college, I like music videos. I grew up liking music videos. I made a lot of music videos in college for myself. But other than that, there was no real epiphany.
And then Soo Young asked, sometimes Pachinko is described as K-drama. Do you agree with that?
Sure. Like, I'm happy taking any labels, right? Like, I don't, if it's a K-drama, it's not a K-drama. It's, you can define, once a work is released, it is yours. That's what I say. Once anyone, writer, once you release it to an audience, you give up ownership of it. That is part of making things and putting it on the public. So if someone wants to define it as a K-drama, I'm totally happy with that. I mean, K-dramas are awesome.
And Marshall asks, what shows other than your own, of course, are on air right now that you think are pushing the envelope in terms of style and voice?
I haven't seen anything in so long. Maybe it's more helpful to say what shows really influenced me. And I would say probably the one show that I think is the show that I have the most respect for is Mad Men. In terms of showing me that you can do literary tone in television, have something be visual, have something be character-wise complex. And I think something like The Wire tells you that even the story of the most disadvantaged people deserves screen time. I think those two shows were probably the most influential.
And then Pearl asked, is the 1,000 Miles project specifically age restricted?
No. In fact, that was one of our big things, is because I do think ageism is a big problem in the industry, which makes no sense. I've never understood this. The people who have the most life experience are the ones who actually have better stories. So why would you close it out to them? So, we really wanted to look for people of all different age range.
I think Pearl's going to apply next year. And then Kay Lee asks, what is your dream project, if you have one?
Oh, I don't know if I've ever thought of it that way. Meaning, I sort of feel like I'm doing my dream projects now. I don't know if, I think everything you work on becomes so personal to you that I think I sort of wish like I wasn't doing things that were so personal sometimes, but then when you do things that aren't personal, you don't care about them as much. Like, why can't I create a Law and Order? Like, my God, my life would be so different if like I just can create a huge franchise like Law and Order. And I just can't. It's not in me.
On that note, I know you started working on a certain second season of a certain TV program, as well as the new one. So you're going to have a very, very busy 2023, I believe. So can you tell us a little bit about what's coming up next for you?
Yeah, I mean, so we're going to start shooting Pachinko at the beginning of next year for season 2. And then The White Darkness will shoot after that, after Pachinko wraps. And then I have a few projects that I'm producing as well that I'm so excited to produce. Right now, we just are selling a show based on a Korean book that we're going to do for Korea called The Plotters by Kim Un-soo. That is such a great book. I'm not going to write that, but I'm producing that. And there's a few other shows that I'm really excited to produce just because my bandwidth is limited time-wise for writing. That feels like already too much.
Yeah, it does sound like too much. But do you always want to? I mean, you just said, for The Plotters, you're not going to be involved in writing. But do you always want to be part of that process from the very beginning to the end? Is that what you're planning to do for foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, for The Plotters, it'll be an interest. The first time I have ever done it this way. I mean, and it really speaks to the global nature of the industry that's turning. I wrote out sort of like a series concept, and that's what we sold. Then now we're going to hire a Korean writer to adapt it in Korean. It'll be an interesting process because it quite hasn't been done before. but it's for a global streamer. So the question is, but it's a Korean show. It is at, heart and soul, a Korean show. So how do you protect what it is, which is a Korean show, and yet still make it big enough for the streaming content? And so it'll be interesting. I've never done that process with a Korean writer before.
How good is your Korean?
It's gone. So I can understand it pretty well. My speaking is terrible. And the actors always make fun of me because it's like, they always say like, they can talk to me in Korean, but then when I talk back, they're like, you just sound like a child. So I prefer to use translators.
So it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you so much for your candor and your
Thank you.
words of wisdom. And we are just so much more looking forward to more things from you. And I was just wondering, and I know you've been so busy lately, but I was wondering, as a viewer too, what are you looking forward to? What do you want to see on the screen next? And perhaps that will inspire some of our writers who are watching. But what do you want to see?
That's a great question. I feel like it's really easy it's so easy to write cynicism. Like writing cynical is the easiest thing for a writer, right? It's snappy. It's you like these sarcastic characters who see the worst in the world, right? It's so much harder to write empathy and to write characters who are who want to do something extraordinary with their lives, and who I think have an innate goodness in them, because I think we've just become way too cynical as a culture and in people. But I am not a Pollyanna. Like, I am a pretty realistic, grounded person. But I think it's really hard for me to watch more and more shows that just, I think, only show us the worst in humanity. I don't know if we need more. I don't know. I just don't know if I want to expose myself to that. I'd rather believe in something than not believe in something, if that makes sense. So I would just ask everyone to challenge yourself. When you write something and you create something, you really are leaving something to the world. It is a record, right? And at some point, I hope all of you guys, I keep saying you guys, I had to stop that. But all of you have careers where you build a canon. And what that means, it's a connection of your work that then becomes a biography of you. And that says something about you. And I think it says something about the world that we live in. So I just ask people, like, do you want to leave the best of yourself to the world, or do you want to leave the worst of yourself to the world? And it sounds like a high class problem, but you control what you write. I just think there's just too much cynicism.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Sue, again. And thank you, everybody, for attending this edition of Writer's Block. Korean American Story will broadcast this program for you to watch again, so let others know about it. Make sure you follow Korean American Story on Instagram, Facebook, or sign up for emails so that you don't miss any other upcoming events, including our annual gala in October. Korean American Story is a nonprofit organization, which means we are counting on your financial support. And you can join the Storyteller Circle by becoming a monthly donor. Just $10 a month enables us to launch a new programs like the Writer's Block. $25 a month supports the complete production of one K-Pod episode. So please text Storytellers to 44321 or visit our website, koreanamericanstory.org. You'll also have the option to make a one-time donation and find out many ways you can get involved, including our upcoming gala in October. And once again, thanks everybody. It's always such a pleasure to see so many wonderful faces from all around the world. And thank you, Sue. We wish you all the best and stay healthy. I know you're gonna need that. So, and of course, our thanks to the staff members of the Korean American Story for making this event a reality, a virtual reality. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.